Thank you very much, Dr. Toying. And I'm sure as everybody has listened to that, you may have questions in your mind. Please, as I said before, don't forget to put them in the chat box and we will deal with them as we go along. The next speaker I'm going to introduce is Dr. Titi Banjoko. Please sit back and hear her profile.
Our next speaker today, Dr. Titilola Banjoko, works as an Executive Managing Director in the NHS. Dr. Banjoko has served on many boards, which include the European Commission, United Nations Joint Migration and Development Initiative, the Department for International Development, the Global Poverty Action Fund Advisory Board, and the World Health Organization's Health Worker Global Policy Advisory Council. She also holds other non-executive positions, which include serving on the Council of the Royal African Society, as a trustee of the Tropical Health and Education Trust, FET, and as chair of the board for the Foundation for Women's Health Research and Development, Forward. Dr. Banjoko has received numerous awards and endorsements over the last 10 years. And in 2019, she was recognized by the Nigerian Healthcare Professionals UK as one of the 70 most outstanding professionals in the United Kingdom. She is passionate about supporting and giving a voice to the voiceless and serving humanitarian causes. Dr. Banjoko is a fellow of the Nigerian Leadership Initiative and the co-convener of the Better Health for Africa initiative. Dr. Banjoko will be speaking to us on demystifying the coronavirus vaccine and brings with her an extensive knowledge of global health issues. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Banjoko to Trinity Chapel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. And all protocols observed. For those of you from Nigeria, you will know that word very well. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited to speak today. I count it as an honor, and I also count it as a responsibility for ensuring that I do pass on knowledge and information to people within my community, especially given the role I occupy within the NHS, where I'm in a position where I do receive a lot of information, and it's important. As the pastor said earlier on, knowledge is important. My people perish for lack of knowledge. And therefore, it's very, very important that I'll do my utmost best to give as much information as I can, noting that I'm not the expert on everything, but I am also informed on a lot of things. And I do hope that you're able to sort of get a lot more information. So what I've been asked to speak about is demystifying the coronavirus. So next slide, please. What I will do is explain what the virus is, the vaccine, talk about a number of myths that are circulating, the vaccination program, and then I'll leave you with a number of resources. So next slide. So in terms of what is coronavirus, coronavirus is an infectious disease, and it's a newly discovered virus from the coronavirus family, which originates from animals and it can jump to human beings. Prior to COVID-19, and COVID-19 is because it was first discovered in 2019, there were other coronaviruses like in the Middle East that cause respiratory issues, and that's called MERS and also SARS, and that actually was severe and killed a number of people. The virus was first identified in China, and I'm sure those who have been reading the news will find that there's still a lot of research going on to try and understand how it actually did originate within China. Now, when there is a disease that is prevalent in one country or numerous countries, it's called a pandemic. So in March 2020, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. Now, the COVID, what it is, it's transmitted by direct respiratory droplets from an infected person, which can be through coughing, sneezing, or people touching surfaces and rubbing their nose or eyes, and that is the way in which it's transmitted. It can survive on surfaces for a number of hours, but doing simple hygiene, such as washing your hand, avoid touching your face, is the best way to prevent and slow down the transmission. Very, very important. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the symptoms, what are the symptoms? Common symptoms: fever, cough, headache, muscle pain. Severe symptoms: shortness of breath, loss of appetite, persistent pain, and irritability and confusion. But in terms of the shortness of breath, anybody having shortness of breath is actually a severe symptom, and that's what leads to people having to go into hospital and being on ventilators so they can help them breathe, because oxygen is critical. Breath of life is the most important thing. The difference between someone who is alive and dead is someone who is breathing and someone who is not breathing. Therefore, if somebody has shortness of breath, it's very, very serious. But the good news is 80% of the people recover from COVID. Some don't even need hospital treatment. Next slide. But this, I just thought it would be good to show the stats of actually what has been the impact by way of numbers. So across the world, as of the 8th of February, and I say as of the 8th of February because today is the, what's today's date? Today is the 19th of February. So there'll be more deaths than this. So 2.3 million have died across the world. In the UK, that's 121 people who have had COVID registered on their death certificate. And it could be more, because in the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't doing a lot of testing. So there might have been more people that have actually died that weren't recorded. How many people have tested positive? Approximately 4 million have tested positive for COVID. So it just gives you the scale and the impact. And that's just the United Kingdom, where you have recorded, if you take the global figures, in many countries where there is no testing as a strategy, there are many more people who possibly have COVID, but it's not documented because they haven't done the test. So that just shows you the scale of the impact. Making sure that we adhere to all the regulations, such as washing our hands, wearing face masks, and keeping our space is very important, 2 meters. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of what the government did last year was initiate a strategy to reduce the spread. And that was initiated through a program called Test and Trace, which I'll talk about later on. And the main reason for this is that many people, as I said earlier on, have COVID, but they do not have symptoms, asymptomatic. And that actually is dangerous. It's dangerous because you don't know, if people don't know they have COVID, they could actually be spreading it. And so if you live in a house, for example, with someone with COVID and you have no symptoms, you could be asymptomatic. And so there is always an assumption that you have to make is, unless proven otherwise, whoever you're standing next to is potentially has COVID. So taking precautions is the best way to prevent that transmission. And this is very important in our culture because people assume that the way people look is how they will determine whether they have COVID or not. No, that is completely wrong. I have seen people say, God, it's not my portion. It's nobody's portion. But the thing is, if you assume that people don't have COVID and flout the regulations such as hugging people, shaking hands, not wearing face masks, gathering together, you are putting yourself at risk because they could be asymptomatic. Very, very important. And I think it's very important, especially those of us who like to be communal. We like to gather. We like to gather with ourselves. We're not, the culture of Nigerians and Africans is to gather in groups and communities, but it is very dangerous. All it takes is for one person there to be asymptomatic and be at the infectious stage and actually spread and transmit the virus. And there are two ways that people can find out is either by doing testing, and that is testing for the virus or testing for the antibodies that people have generated as a result of the virus. So next slide, please. Very important for people to remember. When I was putting together this slide, I actually went through a journey of remembering how COVID started. Infection prevention control was the beginning of COVID. And that was when toilet roll, if everybody remembers the toilet roll saga, when toilet roll, I don't know for whatever reason, and hand wash seemed to be the gold dust of our time last year. And the shops were just in, utter panic. If you saw hand gel, if you could buy it, you had bought gold, even if it was £1 or 50 pence. And that was because our main method, as you know, the virus is a new virus. So we've just discovered that we had just discovered that virus at the time. And the only defense we thought was really our hand gel. And for whatever reason, I don't know. If anybody can explain the phenomenon of toilet roll, I'll be happy to hear. But that was the first thing. So it was, hand washing became very important. And I remember in the NHS then, someone said, it's fascinating that all these hand gels and everything are disappearing from the shelves, because that means we haven't been actually practicing good basic hygiene. Because if we had been doing that, the stocks would have been more, and we would not find ourselves in that position where all of a sudden hand gels were disappearing. So we were not practicing, obviously, good hygiene. That's a message to take home, because even after, we need to continue to practice good hygiene measures. Then the next thing that happened is we went into non-pharmaceutical interventions came in, and that was the lockdown. A lockdown came into place, and that really are regulations. So government regulations, and if people break the regulations, there are consequences. And then social distancing, tier restrictions came into place. The next phase of the journey of Corona became test and trace. And if you remember, when we came out of the first lockdown, what the government then did was the government then started, if you go into shops, you had to leave your details, because if anybody in that shop or where you went to was tested for COVID, they wanted to be able to trace you. So that was a test and trace, so that you could be isolated from the community and support provided so you don't go out to go and infect others. And that's the test and trace. Where we are now is mass vaccination. So you can see we've gone through a cycle from the hand wash and gel to now where actually it is a mass vaccination. And that is our way out in terms of helping us get out of this COVID pandemic. Now, the next phase, which we're all hoping for, and we're beginning to look at that, is really about the recovery. And Tony touched on this earlier. First of all, it's about reconnecting with ourselves when we come out, and that will be part of the recovery. But I also said reconnecting, because many of us also want to reconnect with our families in our countries of origin. But because of the pandemic, it has restricted people from traveling wherever they want to travel. That's part of the reconnecting. Health and well-being is going to be a major thing, because the pandemic has given us really a devastating impact. Education needs recovery. Students having their homeschooling is not going to, a lot of disparities are going to come out of this. A lot of people, the access and the viabilities of people's home mean that it's not equity of education that is happening at this current time. The economy has gone through a devastating impact. That will be need to recover also. Inequalities, one thing COVID has done, it has really shone the torchlight on the inequalities of society. the inequalities, where you find a lot of, if you look at where you find most of the deaths, it's in the people in the deprived communities, ethnic communities. So it has just shown the structural things that are not right in society and the disparities. Health and care, there is a lot of recovery. In my introduction, I work in the NHS. While everybody's focusing on COVID, I can tell you cancer patients are waiting to be seen. The waiting list for cancer is not acceptable. The electives, people waiting for routine operations, waiting list is long. So there is a lot of devastation that it has caused. And Twain touched on long COVID. This is now becoming the new disease. People who have had COVID, some that were even asymptomatic, some that didn't require hospitalization, but they're now fatigued, they're breathless. It's a long period, a long COVID. It's a new disease, and it then begins to affect their mental health. And I know a number of people who that has happened to. So there is a long journey of recovery. So it's important people actually are informed, have their facts, engage and provide support and advocate and communicate effectively, because the earlier we come out of this pandemic, we can start the journey of recovery. It's not just for ourselves, but the next generation. It is very important. So we all have a role to play in this, in this journey of recovery and responding. Next slide, please. Now, myths and misinformation. My goodness me, there are so many. Everybody has become an expert. That is what social media does. I mean, I'll be on platforms and I will see people who are not even in the medical profession of preferring their views on COVID. And I'll be thinking, which qualification do you have? What gives you the basis to be able to actually give your views on this? And that's what social media has done. Everybody is an expert on COVID. I do not know any expert. Everybody's an expert. Everybody's an advisor. Everybody knows what to do, what to say on COVID. And that therefore has led to a lot of myths and misinformation, some out of ignorance and some deliberate. And you have to be wise that there are some people who are deliberately spreading misinformation. That is what social media is good, but it also, as in money is good. There is nothing wrong with money, but it depends on who holds that money. Social media is the same thing. There are some people who deliberately make false information and it looks genuine. So we need to be careful. First one, it will alter the DNA. No, it will not alter the DNA. It's a fragment of the virus genetic material that dissolves in terms of the vaccine when it is injected. So it will not alter the human DNA at all. It just works by producing, giving the message, and it produces a response. And I always say to people that, did you take measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine when you were young? Did you take yellow fever vaccine? Do you take the flu vaccine? Well, it's the same process. So if you're listening to that misinformation, then I think all of us are in trouble, because most of us have had this vaccine. That's misinformation. Next slide, please. The next one is that the messenger RNA, which is used in the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna, that has never been tested or approved before. No, it has been tested. It has gone through rigorous clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that actually, and I'll talk through the approval process, that is what every drug goes through. The paracetamol, any drug you take or have taken in the past, has gone through that rigorous process of trials, clinical trials on people, with people. Phase 0 is when it's done with animals, and then phase 1 with a small cohort of human beings, then phase 2 a larger cohort, and then phase 3 a much bigger cohort. Now, there's another misinformation is that it's a microchip. and that it's the mark of the, I don't know where that came from, but some people believe that the rumors took hold when there's been discussion about digital certificates to prove that you have had the vaccine. That is like, you know, all of us, anybody who travels, you will see that we have your boarding card, where you put it on the scanner, and you can, in fact, in the shops, I was in the shops this morning, I bought some items, I put the scanned item on the scanner, and on my checkout, self-checkout. That is what will happen if they introduce, and I still use the word big, if they introduce COVID vaccination digital certificates. When you are going to travel, you will have to scan, as not your hand, you will have to scan a paper that shows you've had the certificate. That is what people then took hold of and then called it microchips. So it's the same process as we scan our, anybody who does self-checkout in shops, you scan every day. If you travel, you scan. So that is what it is. But people have come again with the people deliberately creating misinformation. Next slide, please. Then the next misinformation, that it's the lung tissue of an aborted fetus. This there's a cell line that is used in all vaccines from the 60s and has been used in every vaccine that we have been taking. It's 3 generations removed from the origin. That is what has been used. So there is so much, in fact, there's a new word now which we're using called infodemic. That is a pandemic of misinformation online and offline. And some, as I said, deliberate attempts to create the wrong information to undermine public health response. Very important that people have to understand that misinformation can be harmful to people's physical and mental health. And it threatens the gains we've got. It also costs life. So my advice, please, first of all, before you forward on, because sometimes I've had to challenge people. I say, did you read what you forwarded? Did you even go to the website? You know, and I find that a lot of people don't even, the headlines, they just look at the headlines and then they forward it on. And I've gone and I checked sometimes and I see the misinformation. For goodness me, why is somebody doing this? So can we make sure we always fact check everything before you forward on? You are also responsible for what you receive and forward on. And it's not just even in the pandemic, as in Nigeria, it is very important because some of the information outside even COVID that goes around our circle, when you check it, it's wrong. And it's creating some of the instability in the country. So can we fact check everything before we forward on? Next slide, please. So I talked about the vaccine, and I said I'll mention the approval process. In the UK, a vaccine trial any vaccine has to go through the regulatory body, Medicines and Health Products Regulatory Agency, independent, with experts on it, independent from government. The trial itself must be approved by a number of authorities. So I'm telling you, you know this, if you work in the NHS, anybody who works in the NHS, when you're doing trials, the NHS Research Ethics Committee has to sign it off. And the people involved in the trial, either patients or the clinicians, have to sign it off. There is a rigorous regulatory process. I mean, one thing I can tell you about the UK is we are over-regulated. You want to see regulation, I can tell you, come and work in the NHS. It is regulated to the T. So very important. Then there is the local NHS Research and Development Office who provide advice. Then we also have the Health and Safety Executive for a number of trials. So there is monitoring, and then post-approval by the there is still ongoing monitoring. So, and that's the phase 4 trial. So anytime anybody records anything from any drug, even today, if somebody takes paracetamol and something happens, it must be recorded and it will be monitored. So it's still an ongoing process. So it doesn't stop, and that's done through a yellow card scheme. Even patients now can report if there is a side effect to a drug. So it is very important that people bear that in mind. And that's part of our safety and assurance process. Next slide, please. Now, I want to talk about the journey that people might have to take to move from being hesitant to acceptance. And the reason I put this here is I went through that journey myself. I went through the journey of having to go from being hesitant to taking the vaccine to accepting that I do need to take the vaccine, and I have taken the vaccine. And that journey is, there is an emotional connection sometimes for some people with the vaccine. And when I say emotional, it's not a head thing. There are people who, for some different reasons, and only individuals can tell you why they're hesitant. My hesitancy is to do with pharma and the fact that I believe, this is my own emotional connection. I've just said it, emotional, that profit sometimes means that there's a speed. So I had my own emotional connection. And what I had to do, luckily for me, is I'm in a position where I can read information. And at the resource page, you will find there's a lot of information. But I go and get the information myself. Another thing that helped me on the journey is working in the NHS. NHS workers were also one of the first cohort to get the vaccine. And I have a number of colleagues who have had the vaccine, who have been exposed to COVID after they have had the vaccine and have been okay. So that means they already have immunity. So they haven't had serious consequences as a result of being exposed to COVID. So for me, it's the balance of risk. You have to say, if you do not take the vaccine, what is the consequences? And I described it earlier. Get COVID, death for some, long COVID for some, devastating impact on their own health and wealth and well-being. Or have the vaccine and protect yourself. And that is a choice that people have to make. Protect yourself, protect your family, and let us get onto the journey of recovery. The more people that get the vaccine, the better we can come out, the earlier we will come out. The society flu, actually, people don't recognize that a lot of people die from flu annually in this country. But the reason why there isn't a lot of noise about it is because we have accepted the tolerance level as a country of what number of deaths we can accept. And vaccination, that is why those who are vulnerable are always called to come and take their flu vaccination every year. So some of the barriers obviously are history. Some people said medical racism, things that have happened. I'll leave the pastor to talk through the religion bit because I'm not a pastor. There are some barriers around people's legal status, and I'll talk through beliefs, attitudes about health. Some people say, oh, I never take medication. Perceived risk. Some people believe there is a risk to a new vaccine. Social and individual norms, links to countries of origin. Oh, in Nigeria, some of them have a belief about the vaccine, and they tell, a friend of mine called me last week, she's going to have the vaccine. She said her family in Nigeria said, don't take it, it's the mark of the beast. So these things, sources of information from our country. And then past vaccination experience. Some people say, I took the flu vax, I was very sick. Remember, any vaccine is meant to create a little mini disease in you to produce the antibody so that when the real virus comes, it can fight against it. So some people, yes, will have a slight reaction to it. But in most cases, when I had my vaccine, for me, I had a mild sore arm and I felt a little bit feverish the day after. After that, I'm okay. So but I just want people to understand that it is okay to be hesitant, but you must make your own personal journey. that you need to take to be in a position where you can accept it. Next slide, please. So the vaccination program. The vaccination program is overseen by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization, called JCVI. This committee has been there for years. There's another thing that COVID has done, is that things that have been happening behind the scenes that nobody has been aware of, people now are aware of it and assume that, oh, it's because of COVID it came up. No, it's been there for years. It advises the government on vaccines. You know, it does that routinely. And it developed, the next slide will show that it came up with the criteria based on mortality of the cohorts that should go first for the vaccination. Those in increased risk of hospitalization, being hospitalized, or getting the COVID by exposure, which is why health and care workers, because they treat COVID patients or exposed in the hospital, are those that are on the priority. Next slide, please. So this is the priority list that I described in the previous slide. So care homes, people who are resident in care homes, older adults and their carer, they obviously are always at highest risk. Over 80s, frontline staff, over 75. So you can see it's age related, because the countries, the whole goal of the vaccine program is to reduce mortality, death, and this is the way it's prioritized, so that people who are most vulnerable actually are protected, and that's why it went through that. Next slide, please. Now, how the vaccine helps in getting immunity is there are 2 doses, and that graph you can see, it says what happens when you get your first dose. You can see how the primary immunity, and then when you get your second dose, what happens. So it just it shows you how actually you can get your immunity. Next slide, please. So getting the vaccination, first of all, it's free to everyone in the UK, irrespective of status, because this is a public health emergency. And it can be offered either through your GP's hub, hospital hub, or mass vaccination center, or in some cases, people who are housebound, there's a roving, what we call vaccination, that takes the vaccination to them. And it is only available through the NHS. But please be very careful. I said earlier on about people deliberately creating misinformation. There are some emails and some scams floating around the place, and they look like it's NHS. It is free. Nobody will ask you to put any personal details, because your GP has your details. Be very careful. This is about the wickedness of man, because some people are deliberately sending out emails and making it look like it's the NHS, putting the logo there, and it is wrong. So be very, very careful. No charges are made even on diagnosis or anybody in relation to testing. So no immigration checks are required. It is very important that people get that message. Next slide, please. So why take the vaccine? Well, it's not just about survival, as I said. It is also, I mentioned earlier, the earlier the NHS can start treating other conditions, the better we will be as a society. If we're all focused on COVID, people who need hip replacement are waiting. People who have cancer, mild cancer, are waiting longer, and it's on and on. I talked about education. Our children need to mix and interact with their colleagues. Online schooling is creating disparities, especially people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I talked about the economy. I talked that people want to go home and see their friends and families and travel. So the earlier we come out of this pandemic, the better it is. for everybody. So it is not just about survival. You are your brother's keeper. It is very important, therefore, you begin to see this as your own responsibility. It enables us to restore, recover, and reconnect. If enough people take the vaccine, as I mentioned, the flu, then we will be able to come out of this continuous lockdown. Everybody now wants the government to say when we will come out of lockdown. But the reason why the government is cautious is look at what happened the last time. So the earlier we take the vaccine, when we're called, work with people who are hesitant to try and understand why they're hesitant, the earlier we will come out and begin the journey of restoration. To date, I think over 200 million people globally have taken the vaccine. So some people say, oh, they want to wait and see. I said, well, okay, 200 million people have taken the vaccine. Is that not enough waiting and seeing? You know, so I think we all owe it to ourselves, but more importantly, to our brothers and sisters and to the wider society to do our own role, not perpetuating misinformation, being informed, getting facts, understanding why people don't want to take the vaccine and supporting them on that journey. So I think this is my final slide, but let me just check. Next slide, please. Yes, so that's my final slide. The rest is really just about resources. Resources, because I am keen that people actually look at validated government trust information, and I'll tell you why it's important. If you read misinformation and act on misinformation, you can never sue the government and you can never claim you are given the wrong information. It is your responsibility to only use information that is signed off by government, so that in any, you know, and this applies to many other areas of our life. I always say to people, where did you get that information from? Or a friend, I say, and is the friend going to follow you to go and make a claim, or are you going to use validated sources of information? Now, all this is validated sources of information from the government. And I will ask that people use that and use that on their videos. Some of them are, and they use videos from public health, you know, and the NHS. Please use that. Do not circulate information from your friend who is an expert, who is not an expert. Very important. Okay. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Titi, you do have the one more slide which takes us through the vaccine.
No, that's that again is also just for people's information, because I talked about the MRA at the beginning.
Explain a bit of this to us so people understand how it works. Just take us through this, it'll be helpful.
Okay, so this final slide just talks about the way the vaccine MRA works. What it does, it's a sequence from the virus itself that they've put in, so you can see the MRA sequence. That's the virus. They coat it, put it in a coating. And the reason why it's put in a coating is it's what will carry it through to be able to penetrate our cells, you know, when we get the vaccine itself. And it's delivered, that's why I said in 2, it's delivered in a liquid coat. It then is injected. It generates spike proteins. And those spike proteins then generate what you call an immune response, so that when a virus then comes, it is recognized to be a virus and attacks it. So it generates the antibodies. And that is the most important thing. The other side here, it just shows you the type, and the arrows there are the 3 vaccines that have gone through the regulatory process in the United Kingdom. As you know, it's a global pandemic, so each country have taken different. So ours at this current point in time, Pfizer, Moderna, and Oxford AstraZeneca have been approved in the United Kingdom. The rest are just for people's information, because you can see other countries where they've already approved it. I hope that helps.
Brilliant. Yes, it does. Thank you. I'm sure there will be questions that people would have. And we have a few. What we might do, we have one more speaker, and Bowie's from Public Health England, and we're expecting her any minute from now. So I suggest let's take a 5-minute break, comfort break, so everybody gets themselves together. And then during that time also, please send in all your questions if you haven't already done so. So we'll take Anne, and then we're going to be asking questions of our panel. Thank you. So 5-minute break, we're back at 5:18.